Not only that, once I can get Eddie to actually do it, he and I are working on a song together for you guys. So that should be pretty fun.
It should
Or
be
a
topping the
new,
charts soon.
yeah, right, a new variation on an old favorite.
I would like to comment that Noah is a musician, so it's not like a random guy learning to play a song that they're just making, right? So,
I mean, I musician's a big word, Carlos.
I think it fits.
That's
I think
true.
it fits. Knowing the history, I think it fits.
I
I,
kind of
I
reject
try
the
to
label musician.
not.
I feel like I'm just not good enough to be qualified.
You know what? I actually a while ago was talking to Carlos about you got very good at guitar in a very short period of time. Like going from when you first started playing to what you do now, like sort of messing around before streams. It's night and day. That kind of uh speed learning, it's not the normal way of doing it. It's really impressive.
Thank you. I just get obsessed with stuff and then I put all my energy and time into it and
That,
learn fast. But
yeah, that's how I am. Well, that's why like I am the way I am with Marxism. If there's a question, I learn and read and learn and read until I can answer it.
right.
Yeah, it's hard not to be obsessive. I know that at least for Eddie and me, it comes from the sports background, and it's tied to the work ethic there. And like the other day, I've told both of you about this, but Saturday night I went to sleep with an idea for a paper, and and I I for the first time ever I went straight to sleep. I usually struggle to sleep, and I was able to wake up at 7 a.m. on Sunday, which was supposed to be a day that I was going to give myself off. I had just finished a big workload, and from 7 a.m. to like 1 a.m. in the morning, I was nonstop writing, and it just doesn't look normal for like the people around me. Like, why do you do that? This was supposed to be your day off, but it's a work ethic that I don't know how to describe it. It's not like I don't know if the word like happiness, if the concept of happiness, how we use it in the West now, at least, if it describes that feeling, I think that it's much closer to like a rush that's connected to like a process of almost artistic creation, that it's not the same as happiness, but it's this feeling that is like nothing else.
Mm.
And that happens to me while writing. I've talked to my friends that are like sculptors and stuff, and forgers, and they say the same thing happens to them. um, but it's a sort of feeling that I think um, we should all try to find in an ideal society, in a socialist society. We should all try to find areas like that where we can freely express ourselves creatively in an activity, whether that be one that's primarily composed of mental labor or one that's primarily composed of physical labor or a mix of both. But that sort of rush, that's something special.
Yeah, when we have these conversations, I always go back to this tweet I made on my old Twitter account that I had in high school, which thank God is deleted now because I'd have been canceled out the wazoo by now. But I said something like, "There's no such thing as just being happy. Like happiness is chasing, like relentlessly pursuing your passion or your dream or whatever that is." And that I remember that was like sort of when I started to realize the alienation that people face under capitalism and the fact that because people have to make a living, there's very few people who actually do get to pursue their passions and who have time to pursue the things they care about outside of high school and maybe college for some. And then if you look back on those times as being good times, you're told to close the yearbook and get a job. So um yeah, yeah, and I'm very lucky too that I get to still pursue wrestling and then um, pursue various intellectual pursuits with you guys.
I think it's Marx talked about this, right? When he describes life in the proletariat beginning after you leave work, right? It's your time becoming yourself, um, and trying to find fulfillment in these few hours that were allotted between, we wake up, we go make someone else rich all day. Then we get a couple hours before we have to go to bed so we can go make someone else rich the next day. It's weird. I was just, and talking to any working class people along these lines, they get it. I was just telling Carlos earlier today, I was at the grocery store, right? We were talking on the phone, and uh, every time I get to like a cashier, they always go, "Oh, how are you doing?" And I'm like, "I am tired as fuck." Right? I'm sorry to swear. Um, and they laugh, and they're like, "Yeah, me too." And I'm like, "Well, that's what happens when you spend the majority of your waking hours stuck here making somebody else rich." I've never ever been told, "What? That's not like that at all."
Right.
Everyone is like, "Wow, you're right. That is what we do."
Well, the joke here, there's a joke that I think Tom Segura does, which is the answer to the question, "How are you?" If it's something beyond good, go fuck yourself.
Yeah,
That's
good or
never
fine, I
the
think
actual
was his
question.
other one. Yeah.
Right. Just trying to get rid of you as quickly as possible by saying, "No, I don't." That's not true. But yeah. But that to that, someone mentioned the flow state. I think that's absolutely correct. And what you said, Eddie, I mean, we have to remember that Marx is someone who read all the European languages, who read the classics, and who was breastfed on Greek philosophy and Aristotle in specific. And you see it even in economic texts like Capital. He brings up these concepts that are from Aristotle, specifically in the footnotes. He's not using it in the main body of text, but in the footnotes, in the main body of text, he does consider Aristotle to be a genius, specifically towards the end of the first part of Capital. He's talking about how Aristotle was almost there at the labor theory of value, but in an Aristotelian economics, you have concepts like crematistic circulation, which depict something similar to what Marx is getting at with circulation in capital, with MCM, at least in the beginning, in the first uh, part of Capital. It gets obviously more complex as you roll into Capital Volume 2. Um, but he admired Aristotle very much, and what you find in Aristotle is a notion in Greek society in general is a notion of happiness that's completely different to how we think about happiness here. We think about happiness as an emotional state, as something static, right? And that's in line with the more uh, static way of viewing the world. In the Marxist tradition, we use the word metaphysical way of viewing the world. I don't think that's the best word for that because the word metaphysics just means that which is beyond physics. It's a term that's used to describe the text that comes after Aristotle's physics and in the body of work of Aristotle. Uh, but the the point that I'm trying to get at is that the concept that the Greeks have is eudaimonia, which refers to happiness as a sort of life process, as a life project, and it's inextricably tied to virtue and to the development of your mental and physical capacities. And it's something that you can't like ask someone, "Hey, are you happy?" It's something completely different. It's an assessment you have at the end of your life. And I mean, you hear people who experience like near death situations. And one of the common things that they say is, "I saw my life flash in front of me," which means I saw everything that I did in my life. And some people say I felt content. Other people say I felt disappointed in not doing X, Y, or Z and not doing more in these areas. That sort of way of thinking about it, like if I died tomorrow, would I be content with what I was able to do throughout my life? Was I able to cultivate virtue, to leave something impactful in the world? That's how happiness is thought of in ancient Greece and in Aristotle in specific as eudaimonia. And so he even brings up the question like, if the people who you were friends with uh, end up being like really shitty people after you die, does that affect the assessment of whether you were happy or not? Right? He says not, it can't flip it qualitatively, but it has to be considered. Like if the people you left are bad, um, even if you were very good, that reflects on your character. So it's a very interesting way to think about happiness, and it's tied to virtue. And I think that the role that labor, that in Marx's mind, the role that labor could play in a communist society is, I would like to think, somehow grounded in that notion of eudaimonia that arises in Aristotle.
I think he talks about it that way specifically because labor in a society where we've advanced the forces of production, um, sort of the relations of production are able to catch up to it, right? And it creates a world where I think he talks about how labor becomes your prime want,
Right.
right? And he's not saying like, you go to work to become a janitor and everybody loves that, right? He's saying we're beyond that.
Right.
We're to a point where everyone can do something fulfilling. And society has changed to a point where that contribution is fulfillment. And I think that's really important. You talked about near death experiences, and not to make it all about me here, but I had three of them. Um, Three times I died back in the day. I would, and for anyone that doesn't know a lot about me, as of last week, I'm 16 years clean. So it's like a whole different life. But I was addicted to heroin and I overdosed. And the one time I was dead for like a minute, it was crazy. I didn't see my life flash before my eyes. What I did was wake up sad, just
Mm.
unbelievably sad. And I turned the whole thing into a joke because that's what I do to, hide my feelings. I'm a man from the Midwest. I can't let people know I have feelings. That's crazy. But yeah, it was like this immense feeling of sadness and I had no idea what had happened. These paramedics had just brought me back, but it really resonated with me when you said that, Corliss, because of that.
And it's sad that it's a way of looking at the world that it's not really promoted. It's hard for it to be promoted when we are aware of the fact of exploitation, when we are aware of the limitations that are presented to your life if you're born into a working class family. It's very hard for that. And I think that that's what maybe turns part of the left off in engaging in this discourse. But I do think it's important because these ideas resonate with a whole lot of people. And if the only people that put up some form of like self improvement project is the right, we're handing over that to the right. And the reality is that the most grandiose self improvement project that you can come up with is the struggle for socialism, which is not just about changing yourself and about striving for for like virtue at the personal level, which is what it might be limited in some of these bourgeois notions, some the better ones, other ones that are more tied to virtue, thinking about virtue in the sense of thinking about money. And what's just a side comment, what's funny is that all of these people love talking about the tradition of the West and Western ideals, and none of them are in line with the ideals of the best thinkers of the West. They're all archetypically in the position of where the leading philosophers in Western history told people not to be in. But the point is that if you leave the idea that there's such a thing as a life project that you can dedicate yourself to, and that production doesn't have to be tied to something negative, to exploitation, that labor doesn't have to be something that we do, as you correctly said in the words of the young Marx, Noah, that labor doesn't have to be the sort of activity that only when we're done with it does our life actually begin, which is how it's experienced under capitalism. That labor can be the end of life, the thing we do in order to feel the exuberant rush and flow that we feel when we're in a creative state. I think that that's something that socialists should pick up, and um, it's difficult to do it in a society like ours. But maybe we can use that to our advantage to say, like, have you experienced this in a moment in your life, and why don't you experience it more? It's because you're spending 10 hours at work doing something you don't want to do and being exploited. And so
Yeah, I like this comment. This may be, a little bit of a different direction, but they say, I don't think capitalism is fair for the simple fact that if we work harder, we still get paid the same amount as the guy that doesn't try. Um, and I guess thinking about it in terms of wages and, the quantitative value of wages is kind of a capitalistic way to think about it. But, with all the things we were talking about earlier that bring us happiness, whether it be sports or developing intellectually, playing instruments, they're all tied to working hard, right? None of them are tied to, necessarily just sitting on your butt and relaxing, which is what we want to do under capitalism. Sometimes what we think happiness is under capitalism, because we're all overworked, as Noah said earlier. But yeah, I think about that idea of like a life project, and looking back at the end of your life and being satisfied. It's like, as someone who was always taught to work hard, work hard, work hard, it's like, yes, I'm proud of like, I think like my dad, who's one of the hardest working people I've ever met, has lived a good life because he's worked hard at everything he's done. But I also think he's been exploited a lot, right? Like, I think his hard work could have been better utilized, not only for his own betterment and his own fulfillment, but for the fulfillment of the society. You know, thinking about like the way Che Guevara talks about labor under socialism, and how everybody can go to work knowing that their labor will be to the benefit of their community, not only to the benefit of themselves, but their friends and family. And that's where like the alienation that we experience under capitalism in the labor process, kind of alienates us from labor and the benefit of our labor, the fruits of it.
I think the three of us are incredibly lucky when it comes to the type of labor we do, right?
Mm-hmm.
We all work at jobs that we love what we do. I'm a carpenter. I love building things, right? I like working with my hands. I like taking a pile of nothing and making it into something beautiful, right? The thing is, I don't get to do that in the way I want.
mm,
I don't get fully appreciated for it. And all of this hard work is to make two guys that sit in an office all day not doing the work rich, right? It doesn't benefit me. It doesn't benefit my family. No one I care about or even know. Most of the time, I'm fixing things at rich people's houses, right? Or the last job I was at, I have some stories about customers, including one who is like literally a murderer. But anyway, this last one, I was at this like bourgeois academics condo on an Ivy League university campus, right? We have one fancy school in Cleveland, and he was a teacher there. And I was just like, the amount of stuff I was doing for this guy in 8 hours, I would love to be able to just go around my neighborhood and like go to my next door neighbor. He's this older guy, Ed, and go, hey, let me fix your stairs so you don't fall down them. Like that would be fulfilling for me, but I don't get to do that because I have to get money to live with. So I'm forced into the proletariat to reproduce things. And that's kind of the way it goes.
right. I always like to bring up the story of my grandpa who uh, was coming of age during the Cuban Revolution, and he was part of the squadrons that were sent out into El Campo, the rural areas where there weren't clinics or weren't schools. There wasn't anything really, and so they would send students over there to teach and to serve as medics and stuff. And he went as a teacher to those schools, but his whole life he was a very hardworking man, and he would stay beyond the hours that were necessary. And I grew up hearing my grandma always complain about that. And one day I asked him, like, why do you do that? Like, you're not getting paid extra. It's not like you get like these extra benefits. So why do you do that? And he told me it's because it's fulfilling. Because I know that if I can finish something, even if it takes me 3 hours more of work, it can help fix a pipe that gets water a day earlier to an area that otherwise would have had to wait. until tomorrow when I got ready, or if it's the weekend until Monday or something like that. So he was working because he felt the fulfillment of what the work was doing for others. And I think that, like you said, Noah, a lot of us are lucky enough to be in jobs that we enjoy the activity that we're doing. What we don't enjoy is the context. We don't enjoy that, how we do it, when we do it, who we do it for, how it gets distributed. We
Well,
don't
we
enjoy
get paid to do it.
what we get paid to do it. We don't enjoy that. All of those things are not in our control. They're in the control of someone else. Um, there's this thing that's been going on Reddit. I actually found out through a student a semester ago, which is like an abolish work Reddit or something like that. Maybe
Been
one of you.
around for a while.
Oh, okay. I mean, I don't even know what Reddit
Those
is.
anarchists, they come up with some crazy stuff
The
sometimes.
abolish work thing is actually fairly popular.
But
Wow,
More than
I had
you'd
no
think it
idea.
would be.
That's
he
crazy.
he told me about it, and I did a little bit of research, and I did a video right after talking about why abolish work is dumb and what the Marxist position on that should be. But it's very sad that that's the position that an exploitative society has led a lot of people into, because work is the most creative thing a human being can do. It's
Mhm.
that one thing that, if you really try to look for a common denominator throughout the thousands of years that the species has been around, it's the one thing that makes us human. The ability to come together, communicate at least in a very elementary manner in order to work on nature and create something that's useful for the human community. That's the deeply human activity. And to have a system that makes that activity so unbearable for so many people that they want to abolish an activity that's uniquely human, that is that's very sad, and that's a sort of spiritual poverty that's constantly reproduced by capitalism.